At the height of America's shipbuilding race in 1941, the inside of a submarine under construction looked like organized chaos. Wooden deck planks rested above steel framing, and workers squeezed into cramped compartments, threading nuts onto bolts that had been pushed through from the top. Days were spent inside dark spaces tightening hardware by hand as others hammered and drilled from above. All this labor went into securing a single stretch of decking, and the Navy demanded precise, tedious work. Nobody questioned the method because that was how ships had been built for decades. But one worker watching this routine unfold believed the entire process was unnecessary. He wasn't an engineer or a Navy officer, just a welder who thought common sense was being ignored. Submarine deck installation demanded scaffolding throughout the interior of the boat. Before any bolts could be tightened, workers spent 2 full days building multiple layers of platforms just to reach the underside of the steel framing. Once the scaffolding was ready, crews above and below coordinated every bolt. A nut couldn't be tightened until someone overhead pushed a bolt through the plank and through the steel. Thousands of these attachment points were required, and workers moved slowly inside compartments barely 4 feet high. It was exhausting, time-consuming, and completely dependent on manpower. But the Navy insisted wooden decks were necessary for traction, insulation, and quieter movement than steel. Nobody disputed those benefits. What frustrated many workers was the slow method used to install them. Every submarine required thousands of bolts, and every bolt demanded access from both sides. The United States was preparing for war, but shipyards were still using the same attachment technique used in World War I. Every wasted day meant one less submarine prepared for the Pacific. Among the welders enduring this grind was Ted Nelson, a 36-year-old Californian earning $11 a day. He had spent 15 years in machine shops, learning how metal behaved and how to fix problems most people ignored. He saw the inefficiency everywhere. Scaffolding wasted time, bolts consumed days, and submarines waited in dry dock for decks to be completed. Nelson began wondering if there was a way to attach threaded studs directly to the steel framing from one side only. If a worker could weld a stud to the frame from above, wooden planks could be fastened without crawling inside the submarine. No more scaffolding, no below-deck labor, just a quick weld and a threaded attachment. The idea sounded too simple, which made Nelson question why it had never been tried. Stud welding existed, but only for flat horizontal surfaces. Traditional flux had to sit under the stud, and gravity pulled the material away if the weld was vertical or overhead. That limitation killed the method for naval construction. Yet Nelson believed this could be fixed with a tiny ceramic cap placed on the end of each stud. The cap would trap the flux, create a clean arc, and allow the stud to fuse instantly to steel at any angle. A single worker could install dozens of attachment points in minutes instead of requiring entire teams to coordinate bolts from both sides. It would eliminate scaffolding entirely and free hundreds of workers for other jobs. Nelson's plan required no exotic machinery, only a spring-loaded welding gun with a disposable ceramic cap that held everything together until the moment of ignition. Nelson showed sketches and estimates to a Navy lieutenant supervising his work. The meeting lasted only a few minutes. His idea was dismissed before anyone tested it, not because it was flawed, but because changing procedures required engineers, paperwork, and Washington approval. The shipyard's welding engineer also dismissed the proposal. For 20 years, experts had tried to solve this exact problem. If the answer was as simple as a ceramic cap, someone would have invented it already. Nelson was told to follow specifications, not rewrite them. He submitted a formal letter anyway, and received a polite notification that his idea would undergo review, sometime within the next 18 to 24 months. That timeline was absurd with war approaching. Submarines were urgently needed, but bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace. Nelson realized that if he wanted change, he would have to build it himself. After work and on weekends, Nelson cleared space in his garage and began experimenting. His wife worried he would get fired for working on unofficial designs. Nelson insisted that solving this problem would help the Navy, even if they didn't realize it yet. He built a crude prototype from scrap metal and spare electrical components. The device looked more like a power tool than a welding machine, but when he tested it on vertical and overhead steel, it worked perfectly. Each stud fused in less than a second. The welds were strong, consistent, and required no below-surface access. Nelson showed fellow welders at the shipyard, and the excitement spread quickly. One worker told him to quit and start a company. If the Navy refused to adopt the method, private shipyards might. Nelson had never run a business and barely had savings, but the logic was hard to ignore. A faster attachment method could transform shipbuilding everywhere. In June 1941, Nelson resigned from Mare Island Naval Shipyard and incorporated his own small manufacturing company. He borrowed money to rent a workshop and began building stud welding guns by hand. Early sales were slow because most companies were skeptical, but then Pearl Harbor changed everything. After the surprise attack, the United States rushed into the largest emergency naval production effort in its history. Shipyards could not afford delays caused by old, manpower-heavy attachment methods. Suddenly, purchasing agents who had ignored Nelson's demonstrations began placing urgent orders. Kaiser shipyards ordered dozens of guns. Bethlehem Steel ordered more. Even Nelson's old workplace, which had dismissed his proposal months earlier, placed a large order without apology. Deck installation that used to take 6 days with 12 workers could now be done in 1 day by a team of 3. Scaffolding was no longer needed, and thousands of labor hours were eliminated instantly. Demand exploded so fast that Nelson had to expand into a real factory. By 1942, his workers built stud welding guns around the clock. Thousands of flux-capped studs shipped to West Coast shipyards, and efficiency skyrocketed. By this point, the Navy could not ignore the impact. Submarine decks, pipe mounts, interior fittings, electrical brackets, and equipment supports now used stud welding throughout the ship. Every stud saved minutes of labor, and every submarine contained thousands of them. By the end of 1942, millions of man-hours had already been eliminated. The Bureau of Ships tested the welds extensively and confirmed they were not just faster, but stronger than traditional bolted connections. The Navy finally acknowledged that Nelson's rejected idea was transforming naval construction faster than any approved testing process ever could. As shipbuilding ramped up, the United States began delivering submarines, carriers, and landing craft at unprecedented speed. Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, one of the largest submarine builders, launched multiple submarines on the same day, something that had been unimaginable before rapid attachment methods became standard. The Essex-class carriers used tens of thousands of studs for flight decks and interior fittings. Liberty and Victory ships, built at industrial speed for wartime logistics, incorporated stud welding throughout their structure. The elimination of scaffolding alone freed thousands of workers for other critical tasks. Efficiency in naval construction meant combat power reached the ocean sooner, and faster deployment translated into real strategic advantage. As the war progressed, labor shortages intensified and women entered shipyards in large numbers. Stud welding required less skill than traditional below-deck bolting and could be learned quickly, giving new workers a practical and safe job. The process became an essential part of the rapidly expanding wartime workforce. Thousands of ships and submarines benefited from Nelson's tool, and by late 1943, the Navy estimated more than 50 million man-hours had been saved. That number does not reflect the indirect impact. Faster deployment meant more submarines hunting merchant convoys, more carriers supporting amphibious assaults, and more landing craft delivering troops to hostile beaches. The technology quietly influenced the war's timeline in ways that statistics cannot fully measure. After 1945, military contracts evaporated almost overnight. Many wartime manufacturers collapsed, but Nelson had already prepared for peacetime. Construction companies, bridge builders, and industrial manufacturers quickly adopted stud welding for steel fabrication. Skyscrapers, power plants, automotive plants, and nuclear facilities needed rapid, reliable steel attachments, and Nelson's tool was ideal. The invention continued evolving, with automated systems and robotic welding plants appearing decades later. Yet the core principle remained unchanged: a stud, a ceramic cap, and a 1-second arc. Ted Nelson eventually sold his company, but the brand lived on through multiple corporate owners. Modern restoration crews still use stud welding to maintain historic World War II ships. His invention has lasted longer than most wartime technology, and it continues serving industries worldwide. But Nelson himself remained almost anonymous outside maritime history. He didn't seek fame or recognition. He simply believed inefficiency didn't need to exist and refused to accept. That's how it's always been done. Nelson's achievement proved something larger than any award could express. Innovation doesn't always come from official channels or advanced laboratories. Sometimes it comes from a frustrated worker staring at a problem everyone else ignores. One rejected idea eliminated scaffolding, sped up ship construction, and saved time measured not just in hours, but in lives. It showed that a single person with determination can quietly change history, even if the experts refuse to listen.